Nick, you're mute. Yeah, we can't hear you.
It's a good thing y'all are here. So, good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And there's not too much delay and my video is not too messed up. I am coming to you from Western Massachusetts, from the Berkshire Mountains in Western Massachusetts. And just trying to get the whole view thing here set up. And where do we start? Well, I'm pleased there's so many folks turned out, and I know you've been going for a little while tonight, but maybe before we get too far into the topic, we take a minute or two here just to center ourselves, to connect with our breath and our body and our sense of our surroundings. So whether you do any forms of meditation practice or it's a brand new thing for you or you do any kind of mindfulness, I hope tonight we'll get a chance to talk about how it relates to therapy, counseling, and working with people, any form of healing that you might be doing. So, uh, yeah, without further ado, you can set yourself up in a comfortable position. Your eyes can be open or closed, whichever you prefer. And we'll just take maybe 2 minutes here. I usually say that and then it goes like 3 or 4 or 5, but just a couple of minutes will be fine. And if you wouldn't mind muting yourself too, just for this little bit, and then we'll have a chance later to dialogue. So you might take 2 or 3 nice deep belly breaths, letting your awareness drop down into your belly, low in your body. And you might sigh once or twice. You can make some sound. Like you're letting the air out of a balloon. So your breath in your belly and letting your belly gently expand as you inhale. So as you inhale, your belly's expanding. And as you exhale, letting your belly gently contract naturally. Contract. Now, most of the time when you do some form of mindfulness or meditation practice like this, we want to breathe in and out through our nose. Though it's also okay to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if your nose is clogged up, if it's difficult to breathe through your nose, it's fine to breathe through your mouth too. And just staying with your breath and connecting with your body. So noticing the position of your body, any tension you might be holding in your body. And if you notice any areas that feel tense or tight or constricted or contracted, just doing your best to soften into them. Let your body soften. It's in some ways, it's like giving yourself permission to soften. To to let your shoulders soften, any tension in your pelvis, in your back, especially in your legs and your feet. We hold a lot of this very subtly coiled tension in our body. And the more we can soften, the more we free up healing energy. So connecting with our breath, connecting with our body, connecting with the earth. So see if you can tune into the place where the plants are growing, where the birds are hanging out. The rhythm of nature. The speed with which things grow. Without the need to force anything or try too hard. Just imagine yourself being with the earth and the elements of the earth inside of us. They are us. So not just inside, but we are the same elements. And lastly, imagine connecting with the whole universe. Everything beyond the earth, infinity. Feeling out into space, and also recognizing that the space beyond us is the same as the space within us. So that there's no separation between inside and outside. You might feel a sense of transparency in your skin. A sense of flow. So we're softening into flow. And letting our breath be the gentle wind that keeps that flow moving. Okay. So even as we shift a little bit and start to talk, you don't have to uh, you don't have to relinquish this attitude, you might call it, whatever it is that we've just been cultivating, whether you feel focused or relaxed. There's a fine balance between getting too relaxed and feeling like, okay, I'm ready to fall asleep, and feeling clear and alert, but also soft and non-reactive. So again, hi. Thank you for indulging me for a moment there. And one of the reasons that I like to start with something like that, and not just a Zoom meeting like this, or whatever we want to call this, our kind of talk or conference type thing. But anytime I work with clients, I'll start like that. Anytime I get into just about any sort of relationship with anything, I try to start that way. Whether it's, going outside to take a walk, first thing in the morning when I get up, um, if I'm going to be if I'm settling into a conversation with a friend or a family member, there's something about centering ourselves, and you can call whatever we just did. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but for me, centering is a pretty good name. there's something about that that changes the dynamic of the relationship between ourselves and the other, whatever that other is. So centering is a really, just a wonderful skill to have, being able to invite your clients, say you're working with somebody and doing therapy, or even just before a conversation with a friend, or sometimes the conversation will start and then you realize, oh, I didn't really take time to center myself. You may not want to disrupt the conversation, but it's something that you can learn to do internally, right? By connecting with your breath, connecting with your body, connecting with the earth and your surroundings, and connecting with the universe. If you like, you could, in place of universe, you could put divine or some kind of spirit or something like that. So it's not so much for me a religious thing necessarily, but a way to ground myself and and remember that in relationships we're really all one thing. That I'll bring this back into a kind of therapeutic setting at this point. That when you're with a client, you're with somebody that you're working with, there really is no separation between yourself and that person. And I'm curious, and in a few moments, maybe I'd love to get a chance to hear what you think about this stuff. But in my experience, when the therapy is really working, I don't know who the therapist is, because the client in their healing process is teaching me about my own healing process, is teaching me about what I need to be in order to facilitate healing. And I know that healing is a kind of loaded word. It can mean different things for different people. But um, what I'm looking for in a therapeutic relationship is a kind of connection, a kind of deep empathy with the other, a feeling like we're making contact with one another. There's trust there. There's a sense of shared feeling between one another. And after that, I don't feel the need to really try and do too much. I don't feel like I need to try and fix anyone or change anyone. Uh, Therapy can very easily become just a talkative kind of thing. You're just talking stuff out. They even call it talk therapy. But I find what's been most really effective for me is a kind of embodied therapy where you and your client are both in your body and feeling this sense of energetic connection, of kind of resonance, like you're there together in the moment, and you allow healing to happen as you both soften and learn to trust each other. Allow yourselves to be vulnerable. So it's kind of like a flower opening. You can't force the flower open. You can just set the conditions so that everything starts to soften. There's plenty of sunlight and plenty of elements so that you and your client can come into that healing space. And when you arrive there, sometimes it's kind of surreal. It's almost like this timeless moment of two souls meeting one another and healing each other just by being seen, right? Just by seeing the other for who they are. So again, I don't mean to sound too spiritual with this, but for me, maybe I do mean to sound that way, because I think that the therapeutic process is ultimately a really spiritual thing. To be able to arrive at that place with another person, where you can feel each other shedding a kind of heaviness and evolving into a better version of ourselves, and it goes both ways, right? So the greatest gift you can have as a therapist, as a healer, is to be working with someone who's experiencing that healing, because they're actually the ones, they're healing you. They're giving you a sense of purpose in that experience. They're fulfilling that purpose. So that's a mouthful. Um, Hopefully you had a chance to check out the article that I sent over. If you haven't yet, it's really great. It was written by one of my mentors, and named Tobin Hart. And he teaches at the University of West Georgia, which is where I did my doctoral work in psychology. Um, I'm not a licensed psychologist. I chose a non-licensure track because I wanted to study more esoteric aspects of psychology, in particular dreaming. So I spent my 5 years of graduate school studying dreams and how we heal in our dreams, and in particular lucid dreams, or dreams where you know that you're in a dream, and because you have access to your unconscious, you might say, you we have an opportunity to make tangible changes to our body mind. And I say body mind because I don't think of us as having a body and a mind, rather a kind of multidimensional being. So each of us is a body mind. And you can take this or leave it if it's helpful for you. It's not quite science yet, but particularly with regard to the healing process, when you're holding something, some kind of trauma or something in your mind, it's also physical. It has a physical correlate. And rather than saying that there's a correlate, you could say that it just is physical. It has matter to it, that mind is also matter and matter is mind, that they're one and the same. They're just maybe different sides of the same coin. So in any event, what I looked at for my doctoral studies was how to go into your dreams and actually change your body mind by learning to accept the traumatic experience. So not to go too far off topic, but an example of that would be that if you're having a nightmare, if you're having a nightmare and suddenly you are aware that you're having a nightmare, rather than waking up from the nightmare and thinking, oh, that was such a scary dream, I wonder what that means, and then you go to your dream book and look for interpretation. In the middle of the nightmare, right in the experience of it, you can become aware that you're in a nightmare. And in that moment, you can center yourself, take a breath, soften your body, connect with the earth, connect with the universe. And suddenly the nightmare is not quite as scary. It's called a disidentification, that this dream is happening, this nightmare is happening, and suddenly if I'm present there, I can create a little bit of space from it, and then I can start to work with it. So it's almost like a form of self-therapy that we can learn to do in our dreams. So anyway, that's what I did my research on. But basically, I've been interested in the therapeutic process for about 20 years. I traveled all around the world studying consciousness and communication and how we connect with one another. And what's especially interesting for me are these moments where I feel another person's vibe, where I feel their heart, where I feel a sense of energetic flow through my own body or as my own body. And I know in some moments, I see Stormy and Mary Lou smiling up there. I know that there are these moments where it's felt both ways. And that to me is really what healing is all about, what therapy is all about. So that's the essence of deep empathy. When you and this other person are in this kind of communion together, and the rules of therapy at that point change. It's not the sort of thing that you can really learn from a book. It's a kind of resonance that you learn by holding space, being soft, and being compassionate with this other person or group of people. So that's kind of what I'd like for us to talk a little bit about tonight. And at this point, we can open it up for some questions if you have any. If you'd like to share some experiences, I'm curious if this is landing for you, if you've had some experience like this for yourself, or if there's anything that's unclear that you'd like to address. So you can, either just unmute yourself. Yeah, is it Ivan or Ivan?
Yeah, Ivan's fine.
Sure.
So, is there some kind of can can anybody do this, or is there like some kind of training you have to go through to really get good at it too? Because I mean, I wouldn't want to go in there with a client and kind of just try to do this that we just did to center ourselves and kind of just mess it up, you know?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So to answer it, let's first, delineate between these two topics I think that are emerging, which is centering, the exercise that we did at the beginning, and also this experience of deep empathy, this experience of connecting with your client or with the other. And this can work with animals, it can work with natural things, pretty much, anything that exists out there can also be attuned with. So centering, the practice that we did, is a way to help cultivate the stillness and peace within, so that you can find that empathic connection, right? Because if we don't stop to really slow ourselves down to help slow the client down, it's very hard to come into contact with our own body and to use our body as an instrument in this way. And that's basically what we're doing. So we're turning our body into this kind of antenna that allows us to recognize what the client is feeling, what the client might need, what we're feeling in response to the client. It's the movement out of technique, right? Because it's very easy to especially when you're starting out as a therapist, to get just like, let's try this technique, let's do CBT, let's do DBT, let's do this, let's do that. And this is more kind of, we're going straight to the source, beyond technique, you might say. So centering, yes, there are lots of different kinds of trainings that you can do to learn this sort of thing. You might look at anybody who's offering mindfulness trainings, will almost always incorporate some kind of centering practice. You probably could learn it off YouTube or listening to guided meditations. I mean, you can learn everything on YouTube these days. I offer a training, both like shorter trainings and then really long trainings. And I can give you my information at the end if you're curious. But really, I think, and I speak from my own experience, if you can remember those first 4 steps, right? Connecting with your breath, spending a couple minutes there, a minute or 2, however long, feeling your breath in your belly, right? Connecting with your body, toes, feeling your belly, feeling your heart, connecting with the earth, and connecting with the universe. And maybe you take 3 minutes, 2 minutes, even 90 seconds to do that sort of thing. It's tempering your nervous system. So physiologically, if you want to think of it in terms of what's happening physiologically, we're moving from the sympathetic fight or flight response, right? Fight, flight, or freeze, where we're kind of on edge. And even though you may not feel like you're on edge, and everybody's a little different, chances are when your client comes into your room, initially, they're a little bit worked up. They just traveled to get there. They've got something going on, maybe that they're coming to see you about. And even you, if you were just moving around for a minute, if your heart rate is up, your sympathetic nervous system is kicking in. And it takes a minute or 2 to shift into the parasympathetic nervous system, into the rest and relaxation, the rest and digest system. So basically, you're taking a couple minutes just to breathe, just to be in your body, and not feel like you have to do anything. So the best way to learn to do that is to practice every day, as much as you can, right? Even if it's just 2 minutes here and 2 minutes there and 2 minutes there, so that when it comes time to offer that to a client, right, as your session starts, and you just say, let's take a couple minutes just to drop in together, to breathe together, you'll speak from your experience. You don't have to think about it in terms of a script, like something you have to memorize, but you'll just talk your client through what you're experiencing in that moment. And the more you do it, the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. And on top of that, the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more it will change the way you feel in the therapeutic encounter. And that's really what we're after, is that kind of empathic connection.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck.
You mentioned how my journey with centering, mindfulness, meditation has started with yoga, and I follow a yogi online, and she does a lot of guided meditation too. And you brought up a topic that I started to make a connection. So I'm still currently in school, and I have a tendency to get really nervous, especially when I'm interested in things that I like, especially my program, whether it be in class. Right now, it's just because I'm so intrigued of the subject, I get that fight. Not, I don't know if I would call it fight or flight response, but I do get my heart rate accelerated. And I've been trying to explore where that comes from. But starting how you mentioned, starting anything with mindfulness, starting anything with deep breathing, centering yourself, it does change the perspective, and it does change the outcome of what will happen because you're centering yourself. So I thought that was a really really good point to add in anything, not just in therapy, but even when you're talking to friends, and it becomes more than just going at something straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm curious, do you want to explore a little bit?
Sure, yes. About the nervousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been trying to further explore what that means. I'm obviously very passionate about the career that I'm going through, clinical mental health counseling. I'm going through the LPC track. And since a very young age, I've always asked myself, like, what is my purpose? And I know my purpose is to make a difference, to make an impact in people's lives. And when every single time I'm in my Zoom, now everything is through Zoom. So in my classes, if somebody's presenting or the professor asks, who wants to mention something, and learning a lot about exposure therapy, I constantly am trying to expose myself more to those situations where I do notice that I get nervous, but I still will speak up. Like tonight, I'm nervous about it, but I want to constantly show out and talk about it. So maybe it can soon, I don't know, it will lessen. I think that's the theory that I'm trying to put out there. But yeah, with certain things, I also like to sing. So if I ever do sing, I get very nervous. And that's why I shy away majority of the time. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all great. I think that exposure and desensitization is a big part of the process. There isn't much that you can do to replace that. That's a good part of a well-rounded approach to healing. The other side, and I have a term for this. I think of certain kinds of practices as more expansive practices. So, for example, you get nervous in certain situations. Maybe it's social anxiety or just nervous about whatever's there. It doesn't do us much good to just name it all the time, and that's one of the problems I have with when we think about clinical counseling. Is everything has to get a label and kind of put in a box, and maybe you just have this kind of feeling. So going out and trying new things, and learning to relax into those situations, is kind of this expansion of your repertoire, you might say. You're expanding your capacity to handle certain kinds of situations. But there's also, and I think you recognize this, probably something at the root of that anxiety. And that to me is more of a contractive experience. And quite literally, that there's probably a place inside, or as in the body, as our body, that is tense, that's holding tension, that creates that kind of response, that nervous response. It's an area where energy isn't flowing, but is kind of constricted or contracted. And all of us carry these kinds of wounds, whether you want to call them wound or trauma or what have you. Um, and they're multidimensional. You know, they're physical, they're emotional, there's a kind of energy that they hold, and also mental. So, can you, and if at any point you want to take a break from this, you just let me know, okay?
Yes,
Can you, do you feel this way now, this kind of nervousness?
I do.
You do. Where do you feel it in your body?
My heart will start to accelerate, and I can feel it. I can feel my heart pounding. Um, I'll start to sweat sometimes, and sometimes the tension. And then it's like when you hear, I don't know if it happens to anyone where you're falling asleep, then you start to hear you feel your heart beating, and then you keep thinking about it, and then you notice that it's like speeding up. So you're like, okay, let me calm down. And I guess it's just like in the back of my head, but just making sure that it doesn't like get out of hand.
So what's happening now? Where do you feel it right now? Can you find the root of it in your body without the need to try and understand it or name it or even make sense of it?
My heart.
Can you stay with the feeling a little bit?
Mm.
You don't need to speak, though you can if you want. Just lean into the sensation. Breathe with it. Nurture the sensation without the need to try and change it or fix it or heal it. Just being with it. Sensation of nervousness. Can you feel it?
Yes.
See if you can find the root. As if you could put your mental finger on it without the need to push too hard. As if you could feel its pulse. Breathing and giving yourself permission to express anything that needs to be expressed. You might feel the need to cry or laugh or scream or shake or just let it speak through you. Everything is okay. How are you doing?
I'm remembering of how I started the program. A lot of fear of failure. I had a lot of anxiety then, and I feel like I'm doing better now. Um, but I don't, is it, sometimes I just want to ask like why, but I know the why question is hard of like why we feel a certain way. Um, but I'm not sure if it's fear that then I get this anxiety. I also feel that it's also hereditary. I know my mom is a very anxious woman too, and like I feel it. I feel it too. But it doesn't happen all the time. It only happens, for example, with topics like this, or maybe I know you mentioned like public speaking or social anxiety, and I start to question like, what if I do? But I'm a very outspoken person, and I can shy away sometimes, but not like the feeling of like this.
So I think when it comes to these kinds of things, you said a lot there, that we don't necessarily want to try and figure it out from the top down, like try and interpret it, or even trace it to this or that. You may start to notice things, like you said about your mom, and that it may be hereditary, it may be conditioned. What's interesting for me is your memory that you had, that you associated with it, of starting the program, and that what you described as a fear of failure. That's what we can call a handle. That's something that we can really work with as therapists, because now we have, there's a specific memory, and that may not be the root memory, but it is a memory. And there is this, fear is a pretty um, substantive emotion. It's an emotion that doesn't get reduced too much. Like sometimes our emotions can be kind of whittled away to the root emotions. Fear is kind of like a base emotion, let's call it that, and primary emotion. And when you say the word fear and you have this memory, you can now use that memory to enter into that experience, right? To bring back up, to elicit that sensation. And I think, for the moment, we're going to pause there, but it's something that you now can go and work with, Stephanie, if you want to, right? You can literally sit down and center yourself. And when you feel like you're in a comfortable place, when you feel like you're able to be vulnerable with yourself for a while, you can bring back up that memory and see if you can bring that feeling of fear, that little spike in, that makes your body kind of shiver, right? That's making contact with the wound. And once you start to make that contact, you nurture that sensation without trying to force any change, just allowing it to be and letting it move in your body. It might start to change and shift, but try and track it in your body. Try and track it in your body. And if you're interested in this kind of work, I suggest you check out Eugene Gendlin. It's an author named Gendlin, Gendlin, or maybe Len, one or the other. And he wrote about a practice called focusing, which is this same idea. Somatic experiencing is another modality that looks at this kind of work. So there's lots of different ones. I teach something called Yoga Nidra, which is a yogic approach to understanding this mind-body connection and how we can be with our wounds in this kind of vulnerable way. And that's how they heal.
I think another connection, and it's probably like where it's all coming. I did an ally, it's called ally training with the rehabilitation program. And they train for individuals that are going with substance abuse, having issues with substance abuse. And I think this is happening because the reason why I started, or the reason it all happened of the career path that I've chosen, is because I wanted to understand people more, especially my family, and why my family would do certain things. I wanted to study the brain, and a majority of like this, and I'm guessing the feeling is coming because I'm witnessing and seeing how mental health is affecting like my own family. I have my father who's a twin brother, who's a twin, and his twin brother. My uncle is he has an alcohol problem, addiction, and he's not aware of it. He's like in the pre-contemplation stage where he's in denial. A lot of traumatic things have happened, and I get to see my dad acts, certain ways, but now studying, it makes sense why people act the way they act, right? It's like you have to get to their level and understand them, where they come from. And this topic, empathy, is what I've been wanting to. I saw the flyer and I'm like, I have to go, because after this meeting, I'm actually going to talk to my uncle, who and I'm going to have dinner with him because, you know, he's in that track where he's just really lost and he needs help. And to the point where it's gotten to where he's not wanting to live anymore. So understanding that and just getting further into that empathetic level with individuals. I believe that's why I may be feeling this nervousness, this anxiety, or I'm anxietying because it's personal too, would you say?
Well, I can't really say. You know, I think I'm sure that if you believe that that's part of it, then it probably is. I think that I generally, and I don't, you know, this is a general idea. I think that this way of empathic connecting, that you can achieve this with anyone in any circumstance, and that I listen for what the wound is trying to teach us about the person and their situation, rather than trying to figure out what's going on with them from a rational perspective. Which doesn't mean that thinking about things rationally isn't valuable, because it can be. But I know from my own experience, you know, both in healing myself and working on myself and in working with clients, that the root causes of certain um, issues that we may be experiencing are rarely really clear cut. You know, sometimes there are things that you can trace to like really specific moments. You know, there might be specific traumas and things like that that happen. But a lot of times, you know, it's just this whole mix of things that contributes to a feeling of anxiety, or a feeling of self-worth, or suicidal ideations. You know, there's so many things going on. And the thing that I know I can bank on, rather than trying to play detective, really, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but rather than getting, you know, approaching it from that perspective, is to go right into the body, to the source of the physiological source of the sensation. And physiological, maybe not the best word here, but the visceral source. You know, I want to go right into the body's reaction to that experience, right? Right to the butterflies in the stomach. Your butterflies in the stomach is a perfect jumping off point to be with somebody in this empathic way, to sit with them and allow them to experience it, and to really give them lots of time and space to just feel. Now, the challenge when you're working with people in this way is to recognize when they're not in their body, when they've kind of gone back up into their story about it, when they just start, you know, going off on tangents, when they are not, when they've lost contact with the feeling, with the visceral feeling. So in many ways, I think of my role as a therapist as helping people stay in their body, because that's where everything is really going on, even if it's uncomfortable, right? You're there to, in a way, to hold their hand while they can be uncomfortable, right? While they can experience their own suffering. And there's obviously more to this. You know, if some people have very deep rooted trauma, and it can be a little dangerous to keep them in their body too strongly. You know, you can't force the flower open. You don't want to push people, but there's a kind of delicate balance of encouraging people to stay in their body, and desensitization and exposure, like you mentioned. You know, that's part of that process of becoming more comfortable in our body, more comfortable sitting with our own wounds, and letting ourselves cry, letting ourselves shake, letting ourselves feel that wound. The Rumi, the Sufi poet, 14th century Sufi poet Rumi, said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." The wound is the place where the light enters. So it's through the wound that we find our relief, we find our freedom. Thank you, Stephanie, for your courage.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any questions? Daniel?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to comment. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of Carl Jung's collective unconsciousness and mindfulness. Um, I've never been really one of the whole, and and again, this is just from me. Coming from a very rational perspective on things and materialistically, philosophically. Never been really drawn by what I tend to see as woo-woo. And yet, a lot of what you're talking about in a way resonates with me. And when I hear like Carl Jung's collective consciousness and things of that nature, it really leads me to be persuaded that we are connected in the way in which you're talking about, and that there are things that cannot be measured yet. When people talk about the soul, to me, that's a placeholder for something that we have yet to measure. Or when we talk about, like Jung was talking about the collective unconsciousness, the consciousness, and that connection between us and the earth and other things. And so it's really funny. I laugh at myself because I think, good Lord, you're falling into that whole, you're, in a way, you're almost there, but yeah, I a lot of what you're talking about, I've been very interested in mindfulness and, Zen and some of these things. I know for me, it has really helped me to calm myself down, to be more centered, to be more focused, to be more empathetic, to just be compassionate with myself first. And that has really, really helped me because I have been doing work working with individuals who have a lot of anger issues. And I do use some of these types of techniques to help them as far as breathing, knowing, helping them understand where they're feeling these anger, where the roots are and some of that kind of stuff, just becoming more aware of what's happening within themselves. And so I can attest to the fact that there is something to that. And I've always been fascinated by it. So I really appreciate your presentation and what you shared with us today and the work that you demonstrated with Stephanie. I really, really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate all your words. And believe it or not, I can feel you as you're speaking. And I think that's, one of the most fascinating things about doing, connecting over Zoom, now that everything is kind of shifting to teletherapy, is even though we're not able to be there in person, there's still this ability to really make a kind of contact with one another. And like you say, a lot of words in general are placeholders, and it's all about the interpretation. So, what is empathy really when we try and break it down? And I'd say in this instance, it's as if there's something about the way what you're saying that is giving me a sense of ease and helping me feel connected to you in a visceral way. I can feel it like an energy flowing through me. And I'm curious, if others have felt that kind of experience before. We talk about it in, as like feeling the vibe, and it's like you say, science doesn't really understand it. We talk about mirror neurons and things like that. But I tend to feel it almost as if like there's a communication happening at a kind of atomic level or molecular level, or there's something about knowing that we're with each other in time and space in a very subtle layer of consciousness where we're, even though you may be in a different state, and even, wherever, there's still this being present together in the moment. And there's something so fundamental about that, and so genius. There's something just so healing and perfect about being together in a state of mutual understanding and respect and compassion. and I get it about like the woo woo stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that necessarily that I think it's, you know, when you hear it, because we're so, and this is the thing, and I wanted to just bring in this, and I'll be quiet. It is about, yeah, because some of my cohort, they know. It, for example, like when we talk about some groups of folks or some groups of people who are much more quote unquote sensitive to nature, to me, I think some of that has just been filtered out for those of us who live in maybe more urban or more modern, you know, and I don't even know how to explain it. I don't know if that's making sense. For example, like they'll say Native Americans and things of that who are much more quote unquote sensitive to, and I think that's fascinating. I just think we're all capable of that, but that has just not been developed in our growth and social development. So then what happens is that when we encounter that, we see that and we think, man, that's fascinating how they just feel that. Well, I think we're all capable of feeling it. It's just we're numb because of the practices and the lack of ritual or the lack of, I don't know, social cohesion that is emphasized within these groups. Because we're all the same. It's not as if though there's some people that are more gifted in that. I just think we all have the same capacity. It's just, some of it's just been filtered out, I think, and conditioned out of us by modern day living and cultural beliefs or ideas or external, or, you know, saying resistance to certain things. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Sensitivity is the big word there. You know, everything that we've been talking about so far tonight is really, that's like such a beautiful way to sum it up, is that there's a kind of sensitivity that we are born with. And I think that some people are, you know, are gifted with it, and others, you know, it can take more effort to cultivate it. But I agree that everybody has a kind of infinite capacity for this sensitivity. And I think sensitivity, or, you know, feel, you might call it, musicians, they talk about having a kind of feel, you know, knowing when to play the note and how to play the note, and how not to overplay the note. That feel is what makes a good therapist. It's having this kind of feel, right? Being able to feel the situation, what the situation is calling for, not to overstep, not to understep, right? But to help find a kind of harmony in the space with your client, because it's that harmony, and in many ways, just like music, it's a kind of harmonic is created there. There's a sort of two beings, or however many you're working with, coming into this harmonic balance, and it's in that harmony that the catharsis happens, right? That people get inspired. So thank you so much. It's a beautiful way to put it. And I'm confident that science will catch up to these ideas. You know, I think they are science, whatever that means. You know, I think there are people out there exploring these kinds of ideas, and new generations of researchers, and particularly therapeutically inclined researchers, will start to develop the languaging for this, and the types of studies that can show empirically that we can really feel each other and be sensitive in these deep ways. And that changes the way we think about consciousness. Yeah. So we've got just maybe a couple minutes left here. Any last questions or anything like that? Thank you all so much. I mean, I really can, even though I'm seeing many names and pictures and only a few videos, which could be just my internet connection, I've felt everybody here. You know, I feel like we're here together. So That's been really an honor to be with you tonight.
I wanted to mention, I know William Glasser talks about it in his Choice Theory book, and he was a psychiatrist, and he moved away from the medical model, and he talked about individuals having a lot of tension, stress, back pain, a lot of medical things that were happening in individuals' body, and it was because of the mental baggage, all of that. It was just a lot of mental issues going on that was showing out in the physiological form. And I can relate to that because I have, like, my mom, she would always mention that she always had her bones aching. And then I read it in the book and I'm like, that makes sense, and how also practicing the meditation with yoga, the individual that I follow, she once, I once did a video practicing, it was Yin Yoga, and it was with the mantra Soham, which is I am. And we had to hold postures for 3-4 minutes. And that what you were explaining in this meeting about finding where you feel tension, holding with that tension. I actually got to experience that, where I had tightness in certain areas of my body, and just with the speaking of her voice, like hearing her voice, being in the posture, I just broke out and I started to cry, and I was like, what? It's like first experience, and this was like in the summer during quarantine time, things were all like, everything was changing, and just to be in that moment, it was something unexplainable. I can't even, I'm lost of words to mention it, but ever since I've been following that, I do now have an awareness, and it goes back to what Daniel was talking about, how majority of the time individuals who do this, they are connected with the earth. They are, because I believe it's all blended in together. How you were mentioning, going back with the body, going back with the breath, going back with the earth and, the universe, and having all of that centered. And I do believe that it is that we're just in different times where we're forgetting about that, because now when I do yoga, I now think of animals. I'm like, well, should I be killing like mosquitoes, or or should I just let them be, and I never had this thought in my head before, like, but now I'm like, well, I should consider every living thing. But yeah, I think it's not in our awareness. Well, majority of individuals, especially those in like cities, and yeah.
I think thank you. The best that we can do is, at least initially, is to focus on ourselves. We're not going to, I'll leave it at that. Focus on ourselves, and focus on, re-inspiring this ability, these abilities, these sensitivities. Taking time to center, taking time to be outside, because nature really does clear the senses, right? And as you say, the screens and a lot of like modern tech, in particular, and just the stresses of modern life, they can really cloud those things. But I will say one thing about Yin Yoga, and for those of you that are familiar with that form, just be careful that it's easy to conflate learning to soften into painful places and overstretching your body and putting your body in positions that it shouldn't be in. So, and that happens a lot in the Yin Yoga field. So if you are interested in yoga, there's an element of stretching yourself and being able to stay in poses, but there are certain kinds of poses that will actually do damage to your body. And yeah, you'll be crying, as you're doing them, because you're actually hurting yourself. There's so the the way I encourage you to think about it is, there's already so much pain just sitting still, just being in stillness, sitting in a chair or lying on the floor. And that's a great place to start. You can certainly scare yourself maybe sometimes. And again, if everybody's a little different, has different kinds of trauma that they're working with, you may need help, right? You may need to work with a therapist or a counselor, but you can learn so much by just allowing yourself to feel into what you're feeling in this moment, just in whatever position you're in without having to stress your body even more. So just be careful with it. Yeah. I think we're getting getting the time out here. So, okay. So let me give you just a quick, I'd love to hear from everybody, but just a quick little rundown of how you can find me if you're interested and you're curious on learning more.
Oh, Nick, sorry.
Yeah.
I think Ivan had a last minute question.
Oh.
No, not anymore, Ivan.
No, go ahead.
Yes.
Just really quick, sorry. How has your experience? Well, do you have any experience using this with any children, or is it mostly like adults?
Yeah, well, I haven't worked too much with children as far as going into wounds. I have done centering with children, and it brings out other forms of creativity. It can be good to incorporate movement, and of course, yoga and qigong and other forms of exercise, martial arts, are really bringing these things together. There is mindfulness at the root of all of those practices. So when I work with kids, I try to get them breathing if I need to. A lot of kids are already very empathic. There's just a question of how capable they are of being still. What the image that comes to mind for me is of a child who's very sensitive, sometimes so sensitive that it's overwhelming for them. So they fidget, they move around, and it can be tough to get them to really express what they're feeling because they're not allowing themselves to be still enough to really to be with you. It's sort of like you're trying to hit a moving target. So with kids, it's important to engage them with where they're at and to incorporate the things that will help them calm down, like breathing and relaxing, even maybe while they're moving or something like that through play therapy, I think is a wonderful way to do that. So I guess the takeaway might be that you don't need to try and force a square peg into a round hole. You know that expression? With a child, this what we're calling mindfulness, and I don't even use the term mindfulness all the time. Just breathing, centering, softening. See if you can weave it into other activities. So it doesn't, you don't have to have a kid, let's sit down and do 2 minutes unless they take to it. But you can make the awareness of breath, awareness of body, awareness of the earth part of other activities. You're sort of slipping it in there, in a way that it doesn't feel like it's a chore for them. It's something that they can learn to enjoy. And to just have lots of patience. Working with kids takes a lot of patience. But kids are very capable of connecting in a very deep and empathic way. So it just amazes me actually how empathic they are. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. But the breath, the breath is first and foremost being with your breath and letting your breath come into your belly. That's where you start. All about coming back to the breath. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's really been wonderful here. This time has just flown by, and I feel so uplifted through this. So that's great. I can tell that you all have a good thing going on over there. I gather you're mostly in the Rio Grande Valley. Yeah. It's everybody out in Texas. I hope to come visit sometime. Dr. Sparrow, I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but he's a real mentor for me. And he actually went to the same graduate school that I went to, but maybe 40 years earlier. And lo and behold, was doing almost identical research to what I ended up doing before I knew about him. So I got there and I started doing my research, and then I met him at a conference, and that's how I came to be here tonight. Really, I met him at a conference on dreams, and we found out that we had these really similar paths, which is kind of uncanny. So it's really, really cool stuff. He is just an incredible resource, and of course his wife Julie too. So really special people. And if you have, I encourage you to take advantage of, maybe, he might be busy, but take advantage of the fact that he's around, because he really is just a wealth of wisdom. So anyway, you can find me on the internet. My website is, I have a couple, but the primary one is evolutionaryeducation.org. And I'll type it into the chat here. Hopefully not make a typo. So evolutionaryeducation.org. And basically I'm the director of this institute that I founded about 10 years ago. And I run programs and trainings for experiential education. Again, mindfulness might be the term you can use for a lot of them, but really it's about emotional processing, learning how to awaken sensitivity, to awaken this empathic connection, to learn to be empathic, learn to guide people through meditation, to guide people into centering and into this process of emotional processing. So I run lots of different trainings, and I'm increasingly running trainings online. So if and when you're interested, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I'll show you what's there, and happy to answer your questions and all that. And I came to meet Stormy and Mary Lou by doing dream work with them for the last several months now, and they're just so wonderful. So I thank you all so much. I thank Stormy and Mary Lou. I thank you so much for inviting me tonight. It's really been wonderful. And the last thing I'll mention is that I wrote a book. I'm working on another one, but I wrote this book called The Light Travelers, and you can learn more about that through the website too. And it's basically the story of my journey. I didn't get it too much into that tonight, but basically my healing journey started when I was about 21, 22 years old, and a dear friend of mine had a car accident and had a traumatic brain injury. And I was working in a law firm, and I realized that it just was not what I wanted to do with my life. That life is so precious. So I set out on a path to discover who I was, and along the way, had to really declutter myself. Had to shed. I grew up in the city, so as Daniel pointed out, I was kind of cut off from a lot of these abilities. And over the course of a decade of traveling all over the world, I learned who I was, and really what I feel I'm here to do, which is to connect with people like yourselves. So it's a cool story if you're interested in consciousness and journeying and things like that. So please don't hesitate to reach out, send me an email, and I wish you all just all the best of luck and success and health and self-discovery and all things good and beautiful in your lives. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
Oh, call me Nick. It's a pleasure. Hopefully we see you around.
Thank you, Nick, for coming. Thank you for sharing everything you have. Thank you to everyone who, gave their comments, shared their own personal experience. Thanks to you all. This concludes our meeting. We'll see you all in 2 weeks, but